Well, it's 1:04, and people do have other things to do. I appreciate your time. I'm going to get started. I don't have Maria is a member of the committee, so I have a quorum. I don't expect any votes anyway. Today's meeting is mostly for informational purposes. And I've heard a lot of different things from different people. I appreciate the experts of the city in terms of the municipality's role in housing and in this particular issue as one of the agents. So I'm going to start with whichever. I believe everybody knows everybody. Rose Webster Smith. No one, I believe it's Springfield, no one leaves behind, but I'm gonna allow her to introduce herself and then I'm gonna ask Jerry and Lisa if you guys could introduce yourselves as well to Rose.
So Rose Webster Smith, Springfield, no one leaves. Jesse's having connectivity issues.
Okay.
Just as an FYI.
Well, thank you. Lisa, Jerry, do you, is everybody know everybody here?
I can introduce myself. So I'm Jerry McCafferty. I'm the Director of Housing for the city.
I'm Lisa D'Souza. I'm a Deputy City Solicitor for the City of Springfield.
And I believe Council Letterman has now joined us. We want to thank, first of all, Focus Springfield for all the help that they do to put on these meetings for us. We can't do this without them. So, silent applause to them and a great appreciation. That being said, Jerry or Lisa, whatever order you'd like, I think the purpose of the meeting is to discuss and get an understanding of how the city utilizes the receivership program. Perhaps one of you can start with a little bit of history and a description of the program and then how the city uses it. Whichever.
Why don't I start? We don't really have a receivership program, and I feel like I've spent quite a bit of time explaining that to people. Receivership is a tool that is available to assist in code enforcement. The receivership is a creature of statute. It was created by the legislature in order to allow the court to step in and appoint someone to take over property. In this case, I'm going to limit my discussion of receivership to housing court receiverships because that's what we're here to talk about. I mean, the receivers are a broader concept that are used in other ways and in other areas of the law. But for today, we're talking about receiverships coming out of the housing court. And it is allowed when a property owner is either unwilling or unable to bring a property into code compliance. It has to, it grows out of the state sanitary code. It is not an available remedy for building code, et cetera. There's other types of remedies there, but there has to be violations of the state sanitary code, which I'm guessing everybody on this call probably understands that the state sanitary code sets minimum standards to assure safe sanitary housing to the citizens of Massachusetts. So there isn't a program. It is one of the things that the city as a municipality has standing to ask a court to appoint a receiver.
I think I can probably add a little bit more background and flesh that out a little bit. To talk a little bit about the city's role. I mean, right, it is primarily something that happens in court. It is actions that have started with code enforcement and have started with code violations and have risen through to various levels of enforcement when corrections were not fixed. The city did find starting in 2008, 2009, that we had quite a number of And actually, it may have even been before that, and I can't speak to that. But I think the city did find that it had a lot of code enforcement cases rising to that level. And as we saw, vacant and abandoned and other distressed housing through the foreclosure crisis, we had a high number of cases. So we did have, in various ways, some role in helping keep the wheels turning, I guess I would say, in that there were issues around finding receivers and making referrals to receivership. And at least initially, I recall, I used to be at Western Mass Legal Services, and at that time, there was concerns about finding receivers at all. So I know that there was some effort to work with the court to train receivers and to make the program work slightly better than it had been before. I think that's really, what to add at this point.
It is sort of, to just clarify, 2007 and 8, as we all remember, was when the significant housing bubble burst, and the city was left at that time with a lot of properties that have now been, I'm sorry, there we go, that are now commonly referred to as the quote unquote zombie properties. And so there was a lot of properties, especially multifamilies, that had been bought by investors. They were often held in single-use LLCs, and they were gobbling up properties, sometimes literally sight unseen. And then when the bubble burst and the property values plummeted, the owners of the property, the investors, would walk away from the properties. Oftentimes they had literally no cash in these deals. And the mortgagees were loath to foreclose because they didn't want to have that property as part of their REO portfolio, with the liability that comes with that. And so they were just, so the term was zombie properties, like they were dead, but they wouldn't be dead. And the city didn't have a lot of other choices. Sometimes, but not always, the mortgagees were paying the taxes on the properties. So we didn't have tax foreclosure as an option, or, it was too early to be looking at a tax foreclosure, even if nobody was paying the taxes. So after attempting to get either the titular owner or the mortgagee to take responsibility with less severe enforcement attempts, we would then turn to getting a receiver appointed to bring the property back into code compliance.
I see Councilor Letterman's hand up, and we've been joined by Councilor Whitfield and Councilor Hurst. And just to catch them up really quickly, I was taking notes, and I just wanted to share with Councilor Hurst and Councilor Whitfield that our guests to this point have stated that receivership is a tool that was created by the legislature. The appointments are through the courts, and it's related to state sanitary code violations. And Councilor Letterman, would you like to jump in with your question at this point?
Sure. I have a number of questions for both Jerry and Lisa. I just wanted to make sure they were done with their overall presentation before I jumped into that.
Lisa?
So is there anything more general that either of you wanted to add before we go?
No, Councilor Edwards had just sort of asked us to give an overview of what receivership is.
That's great. So I was hoping we could delve a little bit more into how it operates in the city of Springfield. So you mentioned the receivership is instigated by bringing a motion in court, in housing court. Who is authorized to begin the process of putting a property into receivership, and who makes the decision about when it has arisen to that point?
So the only entity authorized to put a property into receivership is a court. The city doesn't have that power. The entities that have standing to ask the court to appoint a receiver are tenants or other occupants, and municipalities. That's basically it. I mean, I can think of some rather esoteric reasons. I guess somebody else might have standing, but really the people who have standing are the municipalities and the occupants.
So in the city of Springfield, who makes the decision to make the request of the court?
So the determination of whether or not to ask for a receiver is part of the process once a case has been referred to court and other attempts to get compliance through the court action have failed. So that's a decision that's made ultimately by the lawyers who are running that case in consultation with code enforcement, and sometimes depending on, in the olden times when I was still doing code enforcement, there was some public funding available for it. So sometimes we would be looking at a property that we were otherwise not able to get compliance on, and it was a property that we weren't going to be able to attract a receiver on without some public money being available, because the cost of rehabilitation would have exceeded the ultimate cost of, the ultimate fair market value of the property once put in compliance. So there we might have also been consulting with Jerry's office or, maybe other funding sources throughout the city. But by and large, it's a decision that's made by the lawyers in consultation with the inspectors. And the determination is made based upon a couple of factors. The most significant factor is whether or not there is a significant tax lien on the property, because, and I feel like if I'm going too deep in the weeds, please stop me. But under the receivership statute,
You are. Yeah, you are. So I just want to know, you're too deep in the
okay,
weeds.
no, that's fair.
So I just want to know right now, I'm familiar with how, a case comes to be assigned to a lawyer in the code enforcement unit. So you're saying it's the lawyer's responsibility to bring the motion, and they bring that motion in consultation with the building commissioner and the inspectors based on whether they think they're going to get compliance or not. Obviously, by the time it's gotten to them, they have not gotten compliance, right?
That's
Is
correct.
that what I'm picking up?
No, that's correct. So it's not like we don't say, oh, we don't think this guy's ever going to show up. Like there's multiple attempts to gain compliance without asking for a receiver, because the court would not allow you to get a receiver without a solid record showing that there's no other way to get compliance.
And I think it might be helpful for me to clarify. So it's not just that code enforcement has not gotten compliance. These cases go into court and they try to get the court to order compliance. And it is after attempts for the court to get compliance that it would advance to the degree of asking for receivership. It's
Correct.
not that the city files it with a receivership.
So do you have statistics on how many receivers have been appointed in the city of Springfield in, say, the last 5 years?
Those statistics exist. I don't have them with me, nor do I have them readily available.
That's okay.
I had let, Counselor Edwards know if there's particular properties or, that kind of information that folks want, just let us know and we'll try to comply, but I can't do it in real time. There's just too much out there,
Lisa,
That's okay.
could Olivia just
This
talk a
is
little
just a
bit about?
starting point. This is
May I jump in, Jesse? Could either
can I ask one? Can I say one more thing?
go ahead? You're breaking up a little bit. Also,
So I'll say this. Yeah, I'll turn my camera off so it'll be easier. This should make my voice more clear. So I would say the statistics that I would be interested in hearing in the future and seeing is the number of receivers appointed in the last 5 years, the number of properties that were placed into receivership that were owner occupied at the time of the appointment of the receiver, and then finally, how many of those properties were ultimately seized by the receiver. Do those requests make sense?
No. So to the best of my knowledge, we have never put a property into receivership while it was still owner occupied. The owners have always vacated prior to the receivership being appointed. I'm aware that there was an allegation regarding a rather infamous property in Springfield that it was owner occupied, but it was condemned. So if it was owner occupied, it would mean that the owner was living there illegally. Second of all, the receivers don't seize properties. That's a misuse of the term seized. At the end of a receivership, the court orders disposition, which is usually through an auction. And it has to be publicly advertised, etc. Oftentimes, the receiver is the successful bidder at the property. They bid in at their lien amount. They can bid above their lien. That happens very rarely. I haven't been doing the day-to-day code enforcement since 2016, but at the time I was there, I can only recall that happening once. So usually what happens is the receiver, for example, has an established lien with the court of $100,000, and they will open the bidding at $100,000. So they're bidding their lien amount. And so a bank has a right to then come in and say, well, I'll bid 110, and then they'll take the property into their portfolio. A mortgagee might do that if they felt like they were going to make enough back on their mortgage by doing that, because otherwise their lien is extinguished, and they will get nothing out of the property. So they make some sort of business calculus about the value of the property, and they may or may not bid in at the auction. Owners are also given notice of the auction. They have a right to come in and bid up to the, and prior to the auction, the owners also get notice of it, and they would have the right to petition the court or ask the court. I don't want the property to go to auction. I'm the owner and I'm ready to pay off the receiver's lien. So that's another way that the owner could regain the property, but there's no seizure of property.
Could you explain a little bit about
Okay,
how?
I'll put it in writing and I'll change the language a little bit. I'm all set, Counsel.
Okay.
I was just wanting to hear a little bit about how receivers are, if, for example, if I'm a contractor, how do I become a receiver? What is the process, for contractors that are local who might be interested? There's been, I don't speak to the accuracy of information, but some of the complaints that I've heard over the years is that certain companies have had a monopoly. There's been accusations that because that they have personal relationships with the judges, there's all types of misinformation or information, whether it's valid or not. Could you kind of just touch on what that process is?
Yeah.
And I don't expect you to kind of refute everything, and certainly I have no need to, speak personally about any individual.
So the process to get put onto the receivership list is done through the housing court. I encourage anybody who has interest in this area to visit the City of Springfield's website. I think it's in the Office of Housing tab, but it might be in the it might be under the law department. I just genuinely don't remember. But every year, the housing court, in conjunction with the City of Springfield and now other municipalities, it started out with just the City of Springfield and the housing court, but now Holyoke participates, Chicopee participates, the AG's office participates. And so there's a training that's put on once a year in conjunction with the housing court. And it's necessary for you to complete that training in order to be considered as a receiver through the Western Division Housing Court, which is the housing court in Springfield. The materials from those trainings are available on our website and are very comprehensive. They go through the entire process of receivership. You know, when and where and how does a property get put into receivership? What obligations does a receiver have? What do the receivers have to file reports with the court every 8 weeks? They have to have, they have to be represented by counsel. They have to do this training. They have to file an application. All of their bills that they're submitting for the consideration of the court have to be averred under penalty of perjury. So all of that is set out. And in the beginning, they have to, the receiver and their attorneys have to present to the court a rehabilitation plan that includes both a calendar of events, you know, not a calendar of events, a
Schedule.
A schedule, there's a better word for it, a schedule, and it identifies critical events as far as, you know, the exterior will be done by such and such a date, the roof will be done by such and such a date. And then throughout the receivership, the city inspects the property every 8 weeks to make sure that they've hit those deadlines. And then 2 weeks after the inspection, it's back in court for court review. It's been a little difficult during COVID. Everything's been done virtually, but they've by and large stayed to the schedule. So that's it. There's an application that you get from the housing court, and then you have to go through this training, and then you're selected. They look for people, not just people who have contractors, you know, are licensed contractors, although certainly we have lots of receivers that are licensed contractors. Sometimes attorneys will act as receivers, and they'll sub out all the work. One of the most successful receivers was, I think still is, although she's closing it down, is an attorney from Springfield named Patty Glenn. She also owned a lot of real estate. She acted as a property manager and owner of a lot of residential real estate in Springfield. And she was a receiver, although she herself wasn't hammering the nails. So we've had a lot of different kinds of tradespeople as well as attorneys and just real estate development companies who have stepped in and acted as receivers.
And just while I'm sorry, while Lisa was talking, I just checked where exactly it is on our website. It is under the Office of Housing. So you can find all those materials there. And
also, another thing that I should mention is that the way the list, so now there's a list of all the receivers that have been approved by the court that have agreed to accept receiverships in the city of Springfield. Some receivers only want to do Hampshire County, or some receivers only want to do 4 families and above. So, but let's say we have receivers who will take anything in the city of Springfield. So that list is generated by the court. And then every time that a receiver is allowed, the city is responsible this is something they do with Springfield. I think other municipalities, the court does it for them. But in Springfield, the city has to call the next 5 receivers on that list. And then we tell them the address and then they get back to us about whether or not they want to take it. And whoever gets back to us first gets the receivership. There were complaints that one of the receivers was accepting properties sight unseen, and it wasn't given any of the other receivers that were in that little, block with them a chance to ever be a receiver. So we changed the way we did it, and the legal assistant for the code enforcement legal division, once a year or once every 6 months, I don't really remember, would use a random number generator from the internet. And so they would assign everybody a number, so like 1 through 40, and then she'd use a random number generator to reconfigure the list so that the same receivers weren't getting boxed out over and over again. So there's never been a monopoly, so to speak. There was, however, as I said, this problem with this one receivership company that kept gobbling up everything that would come their way. So they're no longer acting as receivers, interestingly enough, but they were widely quoted in the article from Boston, and they're the ones who did the somewhat infamous YouTube video about how you could use receiverships to get properties for free. That property they were talking about, I do want to mention, was not a Springfield property, but anyways, that's the receiver that we're speaking of.
Just for clarity, do you you're saying that? Can you tell us when, or generally when, the change was made to generated numbers? Number one, and two. You said that the company that was spoken of in the article is no longer a receiver operating out of the city of Springfield, correct?
Correct. Operating out of the Western Division Housing Court.
Councilor Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Attorney, just a couple quick questions. The first is, at what, you said when a receiver is appointed, they are not living in the property. The person who owns the property is not living in it. Can you just explain that a bit more to me? How does that occur?
So to the best of my memory, I don't remember a property that we put into receivership and the owner was still living there. Well, now that I'm saying that, we did have a property that the boiler had failed and the owner didn't have enough money to fix the boiler and they were going to have to move out, and we got an emergency receiver to fix the boiler, and that receiver agreed to take like $100 a month for the next 2 years to get repaid for that. So that, that was an anomaly, and it was really an act of grace that the receiver agreed to do that. So I do remember that time. But owner occupied properties, we wouldn't be putting those into receivership if they weren't condemned. And if they were condemned, then we wouldn't, they shouldn't be living there.
So that's okay. So that makes a bit more sense to me in terms of how it works, because there are a variety of different reasons as to how you condemn a property, right? Like as to what constitutes a condemned property. And so if the property is condemned, then the owner has to leave anyway.
That's correct.
And then a receiver is appointed. True. At that point in time. Is that what you?
Not
okay.
immediately.
So
properties don't get condemned by the court. Properties get condemned by the inspectors. That power is part of the police powers that lie with the code enforcement team. It's part of the city's police powers. So a property can be condemned and never end up in court. and that happens sometimes, like if there's a catastrophic fire, the property may be immediately condemned. Being condemned doesn't mean it will never be habitable again. It means it's not habitable at that moment. So let's like play out the scenario. So there's a property, there's a catastrophic fire, it gets condemned, and the owner, and it's an owner occupied property, and the owners say, yes, we have, we have an alternative place to stay. We're working with our insurance company. They're going to put us up on sometimes they put them in like those big motor homes that are trailers that are right on the property. And then they're going to work with the city over the next year, and they're going to bring the property back into code compliance and make it habitable again. And they're going to move back in. So that's a property that has been condemned. It is owner occupied. But it never had to go to court because everybody's meeting everybody's expectations and it's moving along the way, if God forbid you have to go through a fire, that's how you hope it's going to play out. All right. So now let's change that scenario slightly. There's a catastrophic fire. It's in a multifamily house. There's tenants that are now they're homeless because we have had to condemn it. It's not safe for them to stay there. We're not getting any response at all from the owners. We file an emergency petition in the housing court to enforce the code action. And in the first instance, we're not looking to get receivers. We're just trying to find out, okay, where is everybody? Where are they sleeping tonight? What's the long-term plan? Is there insurance available? And so the first couple times we go to court, that's all that's happening is we're dealing just with the emergency. Has the insurance company been contacted? Have they authorized board and secure? Blah, 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 blah. Let's say we get through all of that and they enter into some sort of a rehab plan with us. And we have verified that there's insurance proceeds available. And then they start missing deadlines. And we start to be concerned because there's this blighted property that's in a neighborhood and there's insurance money that should be going towards rehabilitating the property and it doesn't seem to be. Then we'll bring it back into court and the court will then start ordering them to, show us where the insurance proceeds because we're asking the court to do that. If all of that fails, or if the owners stop showing up for court and they've somehow managed to get the insurance company and left or whatever's happening, if we cannot otherwise get compliance, we will then look at receiver as an option. And at that point, we would say, what are the taxes due on the property? If there's not a significant amount of taxes, then yeah, that might be a property that is worth our trying to get a receiver on. Because if the taxes are too big, no receiver will take it because that stands in front of their lien. The next thing we're doing is giving the mortgagee notice. Hey, we're going to go look for a receiver if you don't step in and take over this property. And a lot of times once they get the first notice that we're thinking about receivership, they will step in and say, okay, we'll finish the rehab. We don't want to lose our whole mortgage. Let's say that doesn't happen. Then we have to determine, and again, the lawyers don't have the expertise to do this. So in consultation with the building department, the housing department, is this property worth rehabilitating? How extensive is the damage? And they might say, yeah, it's got structural stuff. I think we're just going to have to look to get it demoed. That's not a receivership. We would use different kinds of funding to get the property demolished and put a lien on the property that way. Now let's get to the scenario where the tenants have been rehoused, they're long gone, we can't find the owner, no mortgagees showing up. And yes, we think somebody could come in, spend $75,000 or $100,000, bring this property back into compliance. And at the end of the day, that property will be worth 125 or 150. So somebody might be willing to take a chance on that. And now we have a receiver.
Council Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hold on.
I don't know if you said this.
I'm sorry, Mr. Council Whitfield.
Oh,
Council Hurst.
okay, no problem.
I'm sorry, Counselor. I just wanted to get a little bit more. What I'd like to see is some information around those particular properties that have been condemned and have ended up in receivership, maybe over the course of the past 3 years,
Excuse me.
and what for, right? I know you've given me sort of
I'm so sorry,
the-
Counselor, I didn't hear a word you said. I apologize. My allergies are terrible today. I'm terribly sorry. I apologize.
that's all right. I'd like to get an idea as to the properties or the number of properties that have been condemned and then ended up in receivership, and also for what, right? Like, what were they condemned for? Because you've sort of laid out the most extreme example, which, you know, I can certainly understand receivership makes perfect sense in that instance. But, you know, my fear is that, you know, a house is condemned because it doesn't have, someone can't afford water, or, because it doesn't have heat and requires a new boiler, and folks are not able to pay for it, and it's condemned in that particular manner, and then ultimately ends up in receivership. And then the receiver, you know, which is the second part of my question. I'd like to know, how are we monitoring the receiver? Because what I've heard, and what I would hate to see, is that the receiver charges an astronomical price for the boiler, and then the homeowner can never get their property, once the receivership is in, you know, can never get it out of that, out of condemnation, or certainly out of the receiver's hands once it's in the receiver's hands. So I'd love to have those particular numbers.
Okay, and I thought I heard you say for 3 years. Is that what you're saying?
That would be nice. I mean, whatever makes sense. I don't necessarily need you
The
to
only reason why
kill
I'm-
yourself, but
The only reason why, well, no, I mean, it's not, we keep records, but the thing I just wanted to sort of highlight, because I don't want to, you know, the statistics to be skewed. The numbers are way down because of COVID.
I know.
Not
I
only
know.
because of COVID, I would say numbers are also way down because properties are worth more now. So
Well, that's a
Receivership
different-
is down.
So
far
that's-
less likely to abandon homes, and they're far more likely to put the money back in the property, is what we're finding. So just
Yeah,
in general, you know, the amount of blight in the city is greatly reduced, and that is one of the reasons that I see.
right,
So
but that's a different kind of issue. What I'm saying is that our numbers of cases going to court are way down because the court couldn't accommodate. You know, we were only filing emergency cases. And they've only allowed us to start going back into housing court in person for like a month. So that's why I'm asking the question, I'm not sure 3 years will give you a fair
That's a great point.
snapshot.
That's a great point. So let's do it during the height of the receivership period, right? Like during your, top 3 years since you've implemented this program, whatever 3 years
It's not
that
a
is.
program. It's not a
All
program.
right, I'm sorry.
tool.
Whatever. The tool.
I would say the height, honestly, Counselor, the height was probably 2008, 9, and 10.
Wow.
So that's really dated data. So, and I think that was skewed the other way because that was during like the zombie years. And so could I just make a suggestion? And if you feel like you need more data, you can certainly let us know. But what if I gave you 5 years worth of data?
That sounds good.
All right, so.
And I more so want to know those that have started off in code enforcement, and
They all
all
start
start off in code.
They
code
all
enforcement.
start.
So I think what would be helpful is how they ended up being condemned. That's the data that I want to know.
So,
That
and
would
I
be
want to just say one more thing. I just said something that is not necessarily true. There is one other way that properties can end up with a receiver that doesn't start with code enforcement. And this does happen occasionally. I would say maybe twice a year. The court will be confronted with a situation where there's tenants and a landlord in a dispute, and they will sua sponte, which means from the bench, decide they need a receiver. That the conditions that are being described are so extreme and the landlord is being so irresponsible that they want to have a court-appointed receiver. In Springfield, when that happens, I don't think this happens in other municipalities, but in Springfield, when that happens, they contact the code enforcement lawyers directly. They ask to, and they tell the code enforcement lawyers that they're going to add Springfield as an interested party so that Springfield can then oversee the receivership. So in those cases, it would not have started out as a code enforcement case, but except for that rather exceptional circumstance, they all start as code enforcement cases.
Understood. So I'll wait.
That's my entire clarification.
I'll wait to get the information. And the only other question was, how do you hold these receivers accountable for the actual prices that they're saying that they're charging?
Yeah, so I mean,
is there a way in which that occurs?
that's a complicated question. So the court is ultimately responsible for determining the reasonableness of the receiver's lien. And so that's not really the city's responsibility, but what the practice is now, because, you know, the receivers are fiduciaries, they're officers of the court. And so they have an overarching legal obligation to, you know, to tell the truth. But we've, you know, like any other good, well-intended program, we've certainly had some bad apples in it over the course of time. And so the property has, I mean, the process with receivership has now evolved to include an obligation that they provide all of the backup documentation. So literally they have to give us like the Home Depot receipts for the, you know, shingles and I don't know, that kind of stuff. And internally, the city does this. Some of the other municipalities, this burden falls on the court, but we review those and we add and, you know, paralegal is charged with going through those reports and making sure that the asserted costs are backed up by sufficient documentation. And then the court approves over and above the cost of materials, some percentage as a property development fee. And I think it usually is between 15 and 20%. So I don't know. And so that's how the cost part of it is analyzed, right? So if they're saying they're putting in a boiler that costs $4,000, they need a receipt showing they spent $4,000 on the boiler. And then, and again, this has evolved as the process has gone on. And like, you know, when we had concerns that people maybe weren't doing exactly what they were telling, now every 8 weeks, and by now, I mean, this goes back to 2015, because I haven't done this work day to day since 2016, since 2015. Every 8 weeks, the inspectors go out, and it depends on what the receiver has said they're going to have done for that time. But let's say they say we're going to have all the rough electric and all the rough plumbing done by such and such a date. Then at that inspection, every 8 weeks, we'll send an electrical inspector, a plumbing inspector, and a housing inspector, and they go through and verify that, yep, they've done this, and they verify that, and then we attach to our review the inspector's confirmation that the work has in fact been done. Or we may go out and say, they've got the rough electric done, but they're not yet done with the rough plumbing. And so then we address that with the receiver. And in the next receivership report, we highlight that they missed this date. So now we've extended the time to get the rough plumbing done by 3 weeks. And then they're also by that time going to have, you know, the flooring on the second floor done or whatever the next logical step is. So that's how that goes. And we use forms because these are very extensive, but then the forms are then we change the details. So all of that is set out in these reports that are done every 2 months. And they're on file with the court. They're public records. Anybody can go look at any of them.
Thank you.
Counselor Whitfield.
So I just want to remind people that I do have a hard stop at 1:55 because I have to be at federal court on a Zoom call at 2.
Counselor
Okay.
Whitfield.
I think that you answered a lot of my questions through the counselor's questions, because I did want to know how we kept the receivers responsible. I mean, you know what I mean. I can't even think right now. But I did want to say that the demographic information is important to me, because from what I've heard is code enforcement specifically was targeting specific neighborhoods. Lisa, can that even be possible? Based on like
No,
folks
that's
will
not
call and say X, Y, and Z and specific neighborhoods were
true.
targeted?
That's not true.
Okay.
So enforcement is done across the city. The reality of code enforcement is that the 95% of what code enforcement does is complaint driven. So I'm going to hypothesize without confirming or denying that in my 103-year-old house that I live in, there might be code issues. I don't ever call and complain about myself.
Mhm.
So people will say, well, there's no single family owner occupied homes, well, it's complaint driven, and that's, I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but that's just true. And so you will see more complaints in neighborhoods with a lot of rental properties. It's also true that, tenants are much more likely to be subjected to, horrible conditions than most folks who live in owner occupied homes. Or we all live with jiggling the handle on the toilet, I mean, there's a lot of complicated reasons for that.
Mhm.
What is true is that sometimes when we have money, public money available to assist in the rehabilitation of property, whether through a receiver or through a homeowner or through other types of properties, those funds may be tied to certain neighborhoods that are in need of government assistance in order to make properties safe and sanitary. So let's not conflate those two things though. Enforcement is done across the city, and there's plenty of information on, I mean, the number of cases that go to court versus how many inspections we do. There's literally 8,000 inspections a year. Such a tiny, tiny percentage of those ever end up in court, and an even tinier percentage ever end up in receivership. So,
well, one thing I did want to say, Lisa, is, based on demographics that I know of, code enforcement will go to a property several times, right? And keep on giving them some type of ticket or violation, right? And then there's other neighborhoods that they don't do it as much. Do you know how that rotation works?
no, that's not us.
Okay, so that's a code question.
That's an enforcement, that's at the enforcement end prior to referral to court that's nothing within my world. I don't know anything about that, and that would sort of surprise me. I mean, I think that they try to, before they refer cases to court, they try to like cite them. First they cite them with no ticket, and then they do a follow-up, and if it's still not in compliance, this is if it's not an emergency. Obviously, if it's no heat or something, we don't give them all these chances, but let's say it's something less serious than that, and let's say it's peeling paint on a porch or something, then if they don't show a good faith effort to comply after the return, they'll issue a ticket, and then they'll go back 30 days after that, they'll issue a second ticket. Then they'll go back 30 days after that, they'll issue a third ticket. And then if there's still no compliance, then they'll refer it to court. But if it's not emergency, it could, like, we haven't filed any non-emergencies for 2 years because of COVID.
Okay. All right. I guess I don't know what's considered an emergency.
So emergency is, it's any life safety. So like the big emergencies that we see most of, the big ones are no heat. So when it's winter and heat fails, like, you know, we try to get those into court within 72 hours of our getting them, for obvious reasons. We try to do it as fast as we can. Fires, those are emergencies. You know, people are out of the properties. Under state law, they're entitled to, every insurance policy written in Massachusetts has to have, I can't remember now if it's $500 or $750 per unit of relocation assistance for people. So we try to get them into court and get that money and find out from the blah, 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 blah. So those are emergencies.
Okay.
You know, roof failures, that's an emergency.
What about porches? Like
Only
porches?
if it's falling down. So if there's an issue, like if there's a second, you know how like people have like those little balcony type porches on the second floor, those fail. And like that, we will consider an emergency because somebody, you know, a kid could go out, or anybody could go out there and get hurt. We will consider any egress, like blockage of an egress where you can get out in the event of a fire, that's an emergency. Failure of smoke detectors is an emergency.
Okay.
Like especially.
I think that's a great list because you only got 2 minutes. And I just wanted to ask you one final question. Does every owner have the opportunity to get a property back that's been in receivership?
Yes.
So every single time they have the opportunity, and most of the time
they're notified of every court date. We've had situations where a receiver gets appointed and somebody will show up and say, whoa, I'm here now. I want to buy out the lien to the extent that the lien has been established at that point, and I want to step back in and finish I'll bring it into compliance myself.
And they have to pay the whole amount off in order to get it back, like the whole amount of the lien?
Whatever the lien is at that date. However, the court has and would, like, let's say that the receiver's lien is up to $50,000 at that point, and the homeowner can't, or the landowner, the property owner can't come up with $50,000. But eventually, once and especially they can't come up with $50,000 and do the work on the property. So the court will consider other ways around that. So they will say, well, we're going to grant the lien and we're going to put the lien on the property, but you don't have to pay it as long as you don't have to pay it right now, as long as you finish the rehabilitation. And then they work out a payment plan between the property owner and the receiver, which oftentimes involves them, once they finish getting the property back into compliance, they refinance the property so they can buy out the receiver at the end. So the court will work with the receiver and the landowner so that the receiver gets made whole, but it gives the property owner, or oftentimes it could be a bank, gives everybody a chance to get to make themselves whole.
Okay, and I know you got to go, but can you get us the information on how many properties that went into receivership was converted, ownership was given back to the owners? Do you have that data?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I think the court, let me check. I know that a former housing court judge is working with Mass Mutual on trying to do some work with receivership properties to use them as vehicles for first-time home buyers. And I think they might have done some of that analysis.
Okay.
I can't swear to that, Counselor, but I'll be happy to look into that.
Okay, thank you. And I know you have to go.
Also, Letterman's been having some problems with his phone, but I think he might be in and out. Rose, did you have a question?
I did not have a question, no.
Okay.
Jesse was just trying to message you and wasn't able to. Because
I
his
gotta
phone is
bounce.
going
I'm
haywire.
sorry. I've got to go to this other event.
Lisa,
Doing
thank you
that.
very much. Any other questions? I'm taking notes of, and then I can forward them to you. Or to
Yeah, and if you want me to come back, you probably don't because I'm so long-winded. But
No, I actually
I-
greatly appreciate your time.
I'll do my best. Okay.
And if you could
Thanks.
follow up with the request, Councilor Hurst, but go ahead and we'll understand.
And I can stay longer, although as you've probably realized, I'm not very involved in the receivership process, but I can at least write down questions and try to get more information and may be able to answer any other questions.
Well, actually, I mean, the thing is I'm certainly not an expert on this subject, and I can say to people, I have been to Harvard, actually, but it was in the company of Lisa D'Souza and Jerry McCaffrey and a couple other. Matter of fact, my colleague Michael Fenton, we all spent a week at Harvard, where we spent time learning about housing issues and with people from, I believe, Baltimore, Detroit, somebody in the Midwest, and certainly a couple of states down in Alabama or something like that. I knew, but appreciate your time. And
Can I ask one more question, Counselor?
Certainly.
Is there any funding to help folks that maybe can't afford to get their properties out of receivership? And if not, is that something that we can maybe use ARPA funds for or something? I don't know.
I'm happy to talk about this part. Yes.
Well, health, that would be dependent, like you're going to speak on the Healthy Homes program or some of the lead payment.
Yes.
Okay.
So I want to say, so there are programs, they are limited in various ways, and we are always seeking more money to help people rehab their homes. We currently have programs that do emergency repair, is one program. We have a lead abatement program, and then those are available citywide. And then we started a pilot program with some resilience funds we got where we do whole home rehab. Those were disaster resilience funds that we applied for and won competitively. And we started a pilot program that was in sort of the hardest hit neighborhoods, hardest hit by property abandonment. So we selected Six Corners and Memorial Square, and we have been investing in, as I say, whole home rehab. And we do it for both rental properties and owner occupied properties. And for owner occupied properties, it is entirely grant funded. I guess I do want to also mention, we have one other thing that is citywide also, which is a heating system repair or replacement program that is to make sure everyone has a heating system that works. And we work in conjunction with the state to do that. The Healthy Homes program, we have one of, so how ARPA funding is working in the city is that departments are making proposals to the full administration, and there are proposals out there to expand the Healthy Homes program to all of the qualified census tracts, which are under ARPA and under some other federal programs. They're lower income neighborhoods, I guess I should say. We are looking to expand to all of those neighborhoods, and we've also put in a request to have some small home repair money available to other neighborhoods, but really to do this key program that addresses, as I say, it addresses code enforcement issues throughout the home, but also any health related things like asthma triggers and lead abatement and asbestos. And it really covers all of those matters in a home. So those requests are pending. Those requests are pending in front of the city's ARPA, the mayor, and the other folks that are ultimately making the decisions about ARPA.
Thank you. I think I was talking about specifically when the property is already in receivership. Is there any funding to help pay the receiver so that the owner can obtain the property back?
There is not. And one of the reasons for that, and we have sort of struggled with this, when a property is in receivership, the court is actually the legal entity responsible for the property. When we invest money, the money we invest, we regularly get federal funds, and that's what we're always seeking. Housing rehab is very expensive, and we use federal funds for it. When we use federal funds, there are a variety of restrictions that go on the property depending on, federal funds have income eligibility requirements, and then they often have requirements that the property remain income eligible. When a property is in receivership, we don't have control over the property, and neither does the original owner. It is under control of the court. I have never felt like we could put federal funds in because we cannot say to the federal government, we can guarantee that you will get whatever restriction you are requiring, because we don't have control. So we have not had money available to say to a homeowner, now your house was in receivership, you could get this out. And our preference would always be anyway to get the repairs done before we get any near receivership. Attorney D'Souza mentioned the former judge who is interested in thinking about how to think about whether these properties, instead of, we know one of the issues I have seen is the way that receivers take these properties and then own them and make new rental out of them, but they're benefiting. So we have thought about, is there a way to then make these available for home ownership? We are trying to work through the legal issues around how to be able to give the guarantees that the federal government would look for, and have some ideas about how to do that. So that is something else we are looking to fund. And I want to say those are really those are really vacant and often abandoned properties that we're talking about for where we're talking about that issue. We see properties that banks own and haven't touched in 5 years and are, a problem for the neighbors.
Okay, because I struggle because one of my long-term friends, actually like my uncle, Mr. Smith, he lost his house to receivership and definitely was living there. And he's been in my life since I was born, definitely was living there. But where I was concerned is we have all these programs that can help, yet when code enforcement writes their violation, we don't send the owners this information on the programs that can help them maybe get out of the code enforcement situation. So I want to ask Counselor Edwards if we could have another meeting and invite code enforcement to the table, because there got to be a way before these properties get to receivership that we should be doing the most that we can do to, help them save the properties. But I don't know, Jerry, if it's the case that when they get a violation, that, notices go out saying, okay, you don't have this heating system, we got this program to help you, or we got this healthy home program to help you, because the average person isn't going to really know what to do. And if there was no Springfield No One Leaves or any other type of advocacy group to help them, they would just be out there like, oh my gosh, I got this violation, but I don't even know what resources are out here for me. So I think that in certain situations, sending them the solution would be helpful.
So I don't know the current practice of code enforcement. I know we have given them information about the programs, we've given them flyers, we've given them, so there is things, but I think one of the things so I talked about very limited, apart from the Healthy Homes program, the programs are limited. So there is a heating system, there is lead paint if you have a child under 6 in the home, and there is emergency repair, which allows one repair on your home, one major repair. We're often doing roofs. None of those, for a lot of people who are facing condemnation of a property, it is often more than, it may not be those particular 3 things, and they
Right.
might meet the requirements. So I don't feel comfortable. I would never say that we have widespread availability to help people with the cost of repairing homes when they're facing
Right.
code enforcement. As I said, I would say we're always looking for more money. This Healthy Homes was a pilot because we saw the need. I'm pressing very hard to expand this pilot because I do know that we have lots of people in need, not enough money to keep up houses. And, as I mentioned, it's expensive. So we're always looking to inject more funds into the housing infrastructure of the city, and keeping current owners and current tenants in their house is always the best outcome. Getting the house fixed and having the current people remain housed.
Thank you, Counselor Edwards. I just wanted to finish up and say that if this is the time to lobby for ARPA funds now, and this is the time that we should be talking to our state delegation. As far as receiverships go, I think that there are situations where the information and the funding that we do have, the information can be sent to the owners. And so I think that we need to talk to code enforcement and how the housing department together, along with like Wayfinders and other partnerships or other organizations that may have housing funds, so that when folks start to get into this problem, we can kind of like nip some of the things or most of the things in the bud in the beginning before it even goes to court, before they keep getting violations. Because if code enforcement has this information but not leaving it, that's a problem for me. So I'm hoping that you could have another meeting and get all these players to the table. But we definitely there's going to be a supplemental budget coming up in the summer on ARPA funds, and this is a time that we lobby our state legislators to make sure that we get some of this money for specifically these repairs and to keep our residents out of receivership. So I don't know, Counselor Edwards, if you can orchestrate that in any way, but that would be my ask. Thank you. You're muted, Counselor.
Happy to host another meeting at the convenience of the guests, which would be Jerry, Lisa, and somebody from Code. There were some requests that was made by Councilor Letterman early on for some information. I believe Lisa took some notes of that information. Councilor Hurst made some requests for some information. I believe that at some point, perhaps, I see Rose has a question or a comment, but I will certainly make sure I'll address that first, and then I'll just finish up by saying that I'd be happy to have another meeting. And as far as the ARPA money, I'm not prepared to kind of go down that road right now, but Council Whitfield, you
know I am.
I know you will. Yes, I do. And this is not the meeting for that, but for me to speak on it anyway. But Rose, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, so I just want to share that, to Councilor Whitfield's point, one of the main sides of the Springfield Housing Trust, right, was to create these types of grants that would meet people where they're at before they even enter the receivership program. So, having that tool, really getting the board seated is going to be integral. That was one of the reasons that we worked with Councilor Letterman to create the trust. Was we actually had a college class spend an entire semester going through the Registry of Deeds on the receivership program, which is how we know that, the majority of people whose homes enter into receivership, they don't get them back. And so, that's one of the reasons why the Housing Trust was born. It was an idea of 5 years worth of collected data, and trying to figure out ways that we could come up with solutions, right, to keep our people housed within their community. So ARPA funds is always, a good way to start the trust. But it would be able to, but most residents don't know about, the one-time application, which many people use for roofs. We hand that out, code enforcement doesn't. And what we hear from community members is they're really scared of these blight sweeps, where the police, code enforcement, the inspectors, they're all walking and they're walking down the street where they want everybody together so they can condemn a house right then and there. And so, for the community, when they see that, that's why they're extremely afraid of the receivership program. And that's, how we got involved, contrary to people believing it was that one person. That one person never asked Springfield No One Leaves to get involved in their case. It was other community people that were coming, who were getting these code violations, getting hauled into court, didn't know how to do a rehab plan, which thankfully my stepfather was a construction guy. So I know how to do a rehab plan, and we would sit for hours with them. And so, I just want to just clear that up. It was the community coming into Springfield No One Leaves and telling us, which is why we had the class do the data collection, so that it wasn't skewered one way or the other. The facts were the facts, and that was it.
Well, first of all,
Thank you.
Rose, I certainly appreciate the work of your organization and your work and contributions to the trust. Yes, you're accurate. We need to seat the members of the board. I know that for a fact that you are part of the consultation and that we put in place to try to figure out how to shape it. I was part of several meetings with the mayor and the members of the administration to try to get the trust prepared for presentation to the committee of the whole. We had I believe the term is tacit or a passive kind of, we've had a kind of a wink and a nod from the administration that they were interested in funding the program. And that's how, if you remember, originally we were creating an independent agency, and then it was the administration's ideal that if we ran it through the Springfield Redevelopment Authority, that would be more funding for the program because they wouldn't have to establish a whole new system in place. They had the expertise, the lawyers that actually operated. Will be, and I'm sure Council Letterman would concur that we will be reaching out continuously to get the committee in place as quickly as possible. I'm happy to have another meeting with code enforcement. Not a surprise or a shock that people don't know how to access some type of information in this city that would benefit them. I've said it many times in the past that if you could just solve the problem of getting information, you could solve a whole lot of the world, or at least in the city's problems, because it's the same conversation that comes up, whether we're talking about open meeting laws, access to voting, access to public meetings, to council meetings, information, and there's never enough money. Healthy Homes Program, it was Councilor Adam Gomez and myself that were given the initial presentation when that program was being rolled out before the funding even was awarded. And so in my neighborhood, in Adam's neighborhood, when he was a state rep, still a city councilor, were the two where the money was designated. When we were talking about creating the trust, the thing was to try to create a system that would allow for people outside those two designated areas in other parts of the city. And what we recognize, even in certain parts of the visual of a neighborhood being so much better than one of the others, you still have people who are struggling, who could be at risk of losing their homes, but they live in East Forest Park, parts of 16 acres, Indian Orchard, and they weren't available, the money that they had access, because so much of the federal money that comes in, usually through CDBG, has to be spent and allocated in a certain neighborhood, certain area. And the strings that come along with that was the thing that we emphasized to the administration, that we needed to be able to have more flexibility on who to grant money to. As great as the Healthy Homes program, which I believe can fund up to 80% of the value of a property for exterior and interior work to bring it up and increase the quality of the home and residence, it's still an arduous process. And that's the strings that comes with federal money. We were hoping that the trust would give us more flexibility so that if somebody they missed crossing a T, they didn't dot an I correctly, they didn't have the right bank number, routing number or something other, that we could create a system where somebody would sit down with them and work with them and come back so that they got multiple bites of the apple, because the goal was to get the money where it needed then, and which we thought was more important than just getting the application 110% correct. But obviously it's public money, so we do have to be stewards. But I'm appreciative of everybody's time, and I'm eager to have another meeting. I think we, out of respect for the workload of both Lisa and Jerry, it probably should be at least a few weeks to give them enough time to gather up all their information. And Council Whitfield, as you requested, I'll be happy to have another meeting. The request, the use of ARPA, well, that's, as you can see, that's a very tall hill to walk. And I won't say anything to dissuade, you are advocating for how some of this money should be spent. But are there any other questions or comments that before I kind of ask to adjourn this meeting? All right, hearing none, to all of to our guests, Paul, to Rose, Jerry, Council Whitfield, Hurst, and Council Letterman has had continual own difficulty. He's been texting, can't hear, couldn't speak, missed large chunks of it. But let me extend on his behalf his apologies, and personally, sincerely thank all of you for attending and giving me a chance to listen. And I certainly walk away from this meeting more knowledgeable about the entire process. Would hope that you guys would come back again in a few weeks, and when we can reschedule and have some more players here, some more knowledgeable people who can speak on the details of this issue, most complicated issue. So
thank you, Counselor.
Thank you for all you guys do, and be well, and Godspeed to you all.